the secret's out that I bought the Nikon ZF. And if you are a long-term viewer of the channel, you'll know that I was previously shooting on the Sony a7 IV and then moved to the Fujifilm X-T5 for my travel and leisure photography. Now, I've owned the Nikon ZF for over a month now, and during this time, I've taken over 5,500 raw images, and a lot of these edited photos will be added into my portfolio. So I'm definitely a fan, and today I want to talk about the things I love about the ZF, the things I dislike, along with the extreme challenges that I've had to overcome moving into Nikon's ecosystem. So today's video, I want to give my actual user experience of owning this camera, meaning that I'm not just going to be reading the specs off the brochure. We've got a lot to unpack, and let's just jump right in. If you're new to the channel, my name is Gerard Needham. I am a full-time photographer based in the beautiful Gold Coast of Australia. And I also have this photography / YouTube studio where I get to create creative images. I'm also fortunate to be able to test different cameras for this YouTube channel. And the main reason why I picked up the Nikon ZF is because of its aesthetic appeal. That's the reason for buying the Fujifilm X-T5, because it offers a unique user experience that resembles a retro film camera, along with the design which aligns with my shooting style and how I like to edit my photos to get this filmic look. Now, Nikon went a step further with the ZF, as this design is essentially a digital replica of an actual legendary film camera, the Nikon FM2, FM1, or the FM3, which leads me to explain what I love about this camera and my positive user experience from this camera. Firstly, I love that the ZF is a photography first camera, which is becoming rare in the world of this hybrid nature. This is because of the brass dials with the magnesium alloy body, and just the overall retro ergonomics of the camera is designed around photography. Even with controversial decisions like this flip out LCD screen, which when flipped in actually fully hides the screen, selling that concept of being a digital replica film camera even more. The camera will develop character as the paint and that metal wears down, resulting in a pleasing patina finish after a couple years of use. In contrast to, say, the Fujifilm X-T5, it features a completely plastic build, and any scratches or wear mark will appear cheap and just unaesthetic. The weight of this camera is surprisingly heavy, and it is definitely larger than the X-T5. However, I still believe that this form factor is perfect for traveling, especially when paired with the fantastic 40mm f2 kit lens that comes with the camera. By the way, this little 40mm f2 kit lens is truly impressive. It's perfectly sharp. The autofocus is great. It handles flare exceptionally well for a lens that doesn't come with a hood. It was a big surprise to me, as it is a kit lens and does come with a plastic rear mount, which is just something that I'm not used to. While on the topic of lenses, I want to highlight something that's really appealed to me when buying this camera, especially as a Sony user. I can attach all of my Sony lenses to the Nikon ZF just using this very thin adapter from Megadapt. This setup provides full autofocus control, and from my testing, the autofocus performs just as well as that Nikon native lens that came in the box, that 40mm f2. When selecting lenses, it is important to choose small lenses, as larger lenses like my 135mm from Samyang feel awkward on this camera, so I went out and bought two new compact lenses at my two favorite focal lengths, a 20mm f2 from Sony and a Sigma 50mm f2 for the Sony E-mount. I truly wish that Sigma would make a 28mm f2 complementary version, just like the 50mm f2, because I believe the design of these Sigma f2 complementary lenses are just fantastic, and they suit the Nikon ZF body extremely well. One thing that I just haven't had the time to test, or actually haven't found in the complicated menu, is the Nikon film simulations. I'm a big fan of editing my RAW files because they offer much more dynamic range and allow for control over white balance or the tone of the image. I also generally enjoy editing my photos. On the point of editing the files from the Nikon ZF's 24 megapixel full frame sensor, edit extraordinarily well. There is plenty of detail and sharpness. My pastel film Lightroom presets have worked fantastically on these Nikon files. If you do appreciate my editing style and you want to replicate this filmic look, then go check out my presets, which are linked at the top of the description down below. Now, one of these portrait sessions actually ran quite late into the evening, and I quickly ran out of natural light coming through the window behind me, and I was pushing my ISO right up to about 8,000 or so. I thought this would be a great test. Due to the fact of that lower megapixel full frame sensor, you get larger pixels that collect more light. This combination allows for shooting at high ISOs like 8,000 while still achieving relatively clean results. Just quickly for video, I do acknowledge that this is a dedicated photography camera, but the video specs and the performance are completely unmatched by anything in the market today. I'm really impressed with how the 10-bit N-Log profile grades, and this 4K 25 frames per second footage is actually oversampled from 6K, resulting in a much sharper and cleaner image. However, something that surprised me and drew me into this camera even more as a YouTuber is the ability to record over 2 hours of continuous footage. This is impressive considering that most cameras like this typically have a record limit of around 30 minutes because of the overheating. The image stabilization, it's decent and works fine for handheld footage. And also having a dedicated waveform monitor is a nice feature to have when working with video. Last but not least, with Nikon acquiring RED cinema cameras earlier in the year, Nikon has introduced RED LUTs. These red LUTs for N-Log footage just look fantastic. I personally find them quite creative, and I definitely prefer the film bias version. Even though I primarily use Sony for majority of my professional videography work, and for filming this YouTube channel, I'm very tempted to leave all of my professional Sony kit in the bag ready for work. So for this YouTube channel, I can record and photograph everything using the Nikon ZF, which is just fantastic for me. The autofocus of the Nikon ZF is decent. It's not amazing and does not match the performance of Canon or Sony systems, but it's significantly better than the FujiFilm X-T5. I have been using an adapter with Sony lenses along with the kit lens, and I haven't found anything out of the ordinary. I even had the confidence to shoot at a wedding over the weekend, and I tested out the ZF for a confetti exit. It performed as well as I would expect from my Sony or Canon camera to do. Typically, these confetti exits can be a bit tricky for continuous autofocus and tracking, as the camera may focus on the confetti in the foreground and then jump back to the face. And this is exactly what the camera did. So the autofocus is not flawless like any camera, but it's good enough for portraits, landscape, street photography, video work, and all the different types of photography that I participate in. There's not much that I dislike about this camera. I have encountered a few challenges. For an example, I am an aperture priority shooter, and the camera operates differently compared to Sony or especially Fujifilm, particularly regarding the auto ISO. You would expect that the top dial, you could override the auto ISO simply by selecting the ISO on the dial. However, unless you go in and turn off auto ISO, this top dial does not function, which is quite frustrating. The user experience is just not as good or intuitive of that of a Fujifilm camera. Another issue of this camera being a replica model from the 1980s or so is that it has the ergonomics of that era. In contrast, Fujifilm has designed their grip to be small, compact, and thin, yet very ergonomic and fitting in the hand perfectly. The Nikon ZF, on the other hand, lacks a proper grip. The ergonomics are subpar, and the first thing I did was purchased this newer L grip, which addresses some of the issues. It provides a better thumb grip and just adds a little bit of depth to the finger grip. But the shutter placement is problematic. My partner Maria, who is a full-time wedding photographer and who is also here on YouTube, cannot use this camera because her hands are just too small to reach this shutter button up here. I understand Nikon's intention with the grip and the ergonomics of this camera, but I believe they could have sacrificed some of the aesthetics to have more modern ergonomics. In my personal opinion, you can always just attach the grip, but it would be better if the camera was designed with better ergonomics from the start. Finally, another issue is that the screen and the viewfinder just don't match, leading me to continuously underexpose my photos when I was using the screen. And I found that the viewfinder is more accurate. When I first set up the camera, I adjusted the screen brightness to 100% or as high as it will go, which is what I do to all my cameras. But I had to set it back to the default brightness. This is generally an issue for cheap monitors or screens that just can't display the correct exposure and contrast at the brightest setting. So if you made it to this part of the video, you're probably wondering what I'll do with my Fujifilm X-T5. Earlier this year, I purchased the X-T5 for my travel and leisure photography, and I find myself in a unique position because I always need to bring two cameras on these photography trips. One serves as a backup in case my main camera fails. For instance, when my X-T5 died in Italy, I had to go and use my Sony a7 IV. I also need to bring a camera that allows me to film myself and capture B-roll. Therefore, on these trips, I will take the Nikon ZF along with the Fujifilm X-T5. I'll choose whichever camera I feel like using on the given day. If I want to focus on portrait photography, I'm most likely to shoot everything on the Nikon ZF because of the autofocus performance. I also prefer the files produced by the ZF for portrait photography. But for everyday photography, I'll probably just carry my X-T5 with that little compact 18 to 55mm kit lens. I enjoy shooting with that lens and camera setup, and I typically shoot most of my images at f8. Therefore, I don't really need a shallow depth of field or amazing autofocus, and the files edit beautifully from the 40 megapixel APS-C sensor. Alright, if you enjoyed this video and found value in it, or you are a Nikon shooter, make sure you hit that subscribe button to not miss any more great photography content. If you like the way that I edit my photos to achieve this pastel film look, go check out my Lightroom presets. If you like the video, and if you want to see my long-term ownership review of the Fujifilm X-T5, go check out this video right here. For more portrait or travel photography, check the links in the description down below, and I've added a few videos. Thanks guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye for now. Enjoy your week. Let's go.